In the winter of 1777, at Valley Forge, soldiers baked firecakes with no flavor. Boiled organs left them sick. Yet Washington ordered 1,900 bottles of Madeira. A burned logbook listed recipes that no one copied again. What was eaten and what was forgotten? A jar sealed in black paste. A recipe half scorched. Rosewater still perfumed. A spoon. Initials faded. Between 1775 and 1783, Americans ate firecakes, scrapple, and pumpkin pie with rosewater. Some recipes endured, others vanished into ash. When hunger was endured, what flavors disappeared from memory? Welcome to history's ledger. Tonight, we don't linger on muskets or proclamations. We step instead into kitchens darkened with smoke, into cellars sealed in wax, into ration books marked with silence. This is the revolution as hunger, firecakes hardened to ash, organs boiled until men gagged, Madeira poured into crystal while soldiers chewed scraps. Some flavors endured, others slipped quietly into memory. So let us turn the page together. Let us dive into the story, a story written not only in battles, but in bread, in broth, and in the silences of forgotten recipes. The winter of 1777 pressed hard against Valley Forge. Snow glazed the ground, drifts piled against canvas tents that cracked in the wind. The river bent, sluggish and grey, its edges stiff with ice. Inside the encampment, soldiers wrapped themselves in wool worn thin, their breath clouding as they crouched around fires too small to warm them. Food was rationed in silence. Flour issued by the pound, salted meat when it arrived at all. Often there was nothing. Men knelt beside embers, mixing flour with water, pressing the paste into rough cakes that hissed on stones. Firecakes, they called them, dense, hard, tasteless. Joseph Plum Martin, a young private, wrote of eating them until his stomach turned. He remembered ox liver boiled into sickness, a sheep's head scraped bare, even a spleen so bitter he vomited into snow. Hunger left little room for refusal. Imagine the smell, sour smoke from damp wood, the acrid tang of scorched flour, meat boiled until the air grew heavy, the stench clinging to wool. Kettles clattered, spoons scraped, yet men stared into bowls that barely fed them. Beyond the tents, another world endured. Officers dined together, their tables set with porcelain and copper pots simmering with stews. George Washington himself ordered shipments of Madeira, sweet, fortified, drawn from bottles sealed in wax. Toasts were raised in lamplight, the perfume of wine filling rooms, while soldiers nearby chewed cakes of ash. The contrast was striking. Silence at the fires, laughter in the quarters. A soldier's spoon blackened with soot, a general's goblet glinting in candlelight. Both endured the same winter, but not the same hunger. Yet not all chose profit. Christopher Ludwig, the German-born baker, vowed, "For every 100 pounds of flour, I will give you 135 pounds of bread. His ovens glowed, the smell of loaves drifting across the camp. Men tore crusts with hands raw from frost, sighing as warmth returned to mouths that had forgotten bread. Still, questions remain. Firecakes crumbled into ash, Madeira bottles emptied, recipes burned in kitchens, sealed jars forgotten in cellars. A spoon with initials worn smooth, found years later in dirt. Hints at lives lived between hunger and ritual. Would you have chewed the firecakes, ash on your tongue, or lifted a crystal glass of Madeira, pretending hunger belonged only to others? Joseph Plum Martin was only a boy when he joined the Continental Army, yet his memoir preserved the meals no one wished to recall. He wrote of food not as nourishment, but ordeal. One night he boiled the liver of an ox. The broth was thick with iron, the meat so coarse it made him violently ill. He compared the sickness to grape shot from a cannon. Another day brought a sheep's head, its fat boiled into a pungent haze. The cheeks and tongue were scraped bare, nothing wasted. Then came a spleen, slippery, bitter, nearly inedible. He swallowed what he could and vomited in the snow. Hunger left no room for delicacy. Picture Valley Forge in 1777, a kettle blackened with soot rattling above weak flames, smoke curling through a tent lined with damp wool. Men crouched around, spoons dull, hands cracked from frost. The smell of offal boiling mixed with sweat and leather. They gagged and chewed because choice no longer existed. Only yards away, another scene unfolded. Officers dined together, copper pots simmering with salted meats, porcelain plates laid on linen cloths. Aides poured Madeira into crystal goblets, its sweetness perfuming the air. Washington himself had ordered crates by the hundreds, corks sealed in wax, bottles stacked in wooden cases. While soldiers bent over scraps, officers raised their glasses. The contrast was unbearable. At the fires, groans, scorched bread, organs boiled to stench. In the quarters, laughter, silver spoons ringing against copper, crystal flashing in candlelight. One world survived on offal, the other on ritual. Martin's words stripped away romance. His accounts remind us that hunger was its own battlefield. We remember generals on horseback, but how often do we recall the ox spleen or the retching into snow? Would you have sat at the fire, spooning broth bitter with iron, or lifted a crystal glass of Madeira, pretending hunger was for others to endure? Not all food in the revolution was ash and offal. Even in hunger, kitchens sometimes glowed with fragrance, recipes crossing oceans and bending to local fields. Some flavors endured, others vanished into silence. Pumpkin, humble and plentiful, became a canvas for extravagance. Hannah Glass's cookbook recorded a recipe already beloved. Pumpkin stewed soft, folded with milk, eggs, sugar, and butter. But also Malaga wine, nutmeg, and rosewater. Rosewater poured from delicate vials transformed gourd into perfume. The pie, baked golden, its scent drifting into halls like memory. Imagine that pie in the same winter soldiers at Valley Forge ate firecakes. One table perfumed with roses, another with scorched flower. Which lingers more, the perfume of rosewater or the smoke of hunger? Cranberries too found their place, stewed into jellies, sweetened with molasses, baked into butter crusts, sharp and sweet, red gleaming against gold pastry. Families gathered in lamplight, forks scraping tin plates, the taste of berries binding households together. Luxury threaded all. Washington ordered Madeira by the cask, corks sealed in wax, bottles glowing amber in candlelight. Congress toasted independence with it. Hancock's shipments stirred mobs in Boston, proof that flavor and politics were never far apart. Even as soldiers chewed cakes of ash, Madeira flowed in halls like memory. Peace brought new indulgence. In Paris, Jefferson encountered ice cream, sugar, egg yolks, perfumed with rosewater, frozen into molds. He carried copper pots and recipes back to Monticello, serving the delicacy at state dinners. Guests marveled at the contrast. Cold cream wrapped in warm pastry, a dessert as strange as it was refined. Rosewater, nutmeg, Malaga wine, cranberries, Madeira, even ice. These became the revolution's flavors of memory. Yet how many others were lost? Recipes written once, burned in ledgers, sealed in jars never opened. One fragment remains. A charred logbook from a Boston cellar recorded 1 pint of milk, 1 glass of rosewater, half a pumpkin, stewed until memory. The rest was blackened. Only the faint scent of rosewater clung to the page. Would you have baked with rosewater, pouring luxury into a pie while war rumbled beyond your door? Or stirred flour into firecakes, swallowing ash as your only flavor? July 1777. Boston Harbor still whispered of tea tossed into its depths, but the new obsession was darker and scarcer. Coffee. Once a patriotic substitute for loyalist tea, by midsummer, its price soared. Too steeply. Word spread that merchant Thomas Boylston had stockpiled beans, waiting for desperate neighbors to pay. Abigail Adams recorded what followed. More than 100 women, many wives of soldiers, gathered in the streets. Skirts brushed cobblestones, carts rattled, voices rose above the noise. They marched to Boylston's warehouse. Inside, burlap sacks gave off the sharp, bitter scent of beans. Boylston refused to yield. Fingers seized his collar, dragging him into the street. He sprawled in a cart, wig askew, dignity scattered. At last he surrendered his keys. The doors swung open. Coffee spilled into baskets and arms until the air itself seemed awake. The riot ended without blood, but hunger had broken politeness. Coffee in the revolution was more than drink. It was defiance. In taverns, pewter mugs clattered on oak tables, steam curling into rafters. Soldiers cradled tin cups, the warmth easing hands cracked from cold. To sip coffee was to reject Britain's leaf, to riot for it was to claim survival. And yet not all cups were equal. In Philadelphia drawing rooms, beans brewed in porcelain pots, poured into cups rimmed with gold, sweetened with imported sugar. Silver spoons stirred, the fragrance mingling with perfume and Madeira nearby. Outside, women stormed warehouses. Inside, chandeliers glowed on polished mahogany as coffee steamed in porcelain. Luxury and scarcity walked side by side. A soldier's bitter brew, a loyalist's porcelain service, a woman's hand gripping a merchant's collar. One diary fragment tells of beans hidden in a jar, sealed with wax, buried in a cellar. The line falters. I keep one jar sealed with wax, not to be opened until need demands. The name is gone, but the image lingers. A jar in the dark, perfumed with promise, waiting for hunger to crack its seal. Would you have joined the women, coffee's sharpness clinging to your clothes? Or sat in a parlor, silver spoon in hand, sipping while the city thundered outside? Scrapple was never meant to be elegant. It was born of thrift, a dish made from what remained after the better cuts were carved away. For some, survival food. For others, comfort passed from hearth to memory. In the revolution, nothing was wasted. Not a pig's head, not its feet, not the fragments left once hams were salted. The Pennsylvania Dutch perfected it. They simmered heads and jowls, ears and tongue, until meat loosened from bone. The smell of iron and fat filled kitchens blackened with soot, salt, pepper, maybe a sprig of sage if cupboards allowed. Broth thickened with cornmeal until it set heavy, poured into pans, cooled then sliced and fried in lard until the edges crackled. Crisp outside, soft within. Picture the scene. A low fire, fat popping in a pan, the smell sharp yet comforting. Children crouched near the hearth, watching slices curl, steam rising. Outside, winter pressed against shutters. Inside, plates at least held warmth. For soldiers, scrapple was memory. In camp, they ate salted pork, dried fish, bread hard enough to crack teeth. But in letters home, they asked of scrapple, blood puddings, pumpkin pies scented with rosewater. These dishes tied them to copper kettles hung above hearths, linens embroidered with initials spread on rough tables. Poverty's food, yes, but also ritual. Not all tasted it equally. Officers dined with porcelain dishes and cut glass jars of preserves, Madeira glowing in crystal. Scrapple belonged to those who boiled heads and feet, who turned thrift into sustenance. Mystery lingers in fragments. In a Virginia cellar, archaeologists found a sealed jar of paste black as ink, faintly sweet even after a century. Tests revealed marrow, cinnamon, and treacle. No recipe matches it. Was it a cousin of scrapple, or something never written down? The jar is silent. Scrapple endured. It crossed from poverty to tradition. from necessity to nostalgia. But other dishes vanished, made once and forgotten. Picture yourself at that table, a plate of scrapple fried golden, cornmeal and pork steaming in the air. Would you taste comfort or desperation, survival or loss? Blood pudding was never meant to be beautiful. It stretched hunger, transforming what should be discarded into something that could keep families alive. In the 18th century, thrift was survival, so blood was saved. Hannah Glass's Art of Cookery, printed in American editions by 1805, gave the method: cornmeal stirred into milk, or water if milk was scarce until thick. Into it, fresh animal blood was poured, still warm from slaughter. Treacle, molasses sharp and burnt sweet, and a lump of lard followed. The mix was packed into casings, boiled for hours until dense and dark, smelling of iron and sugar, smoke and fat. Picture a Pennsylvania farmhouse, a basin of blood caught from slaughter, steam rising from a kettle over the hearth. Children wrinkled noses as mothers stirred steadily, the smell of treacle battling the tang of iron. When ready, the pudding was sliced and fried, crisp edges masking heaviness within. Joseph Plum Martin never described blood pudding directly, but his memoir of boiled organs and firecakes shows how little would shock hungry men. At Valley Forge, a dish of cornmeal, blood, and molasses might almost have felt like feast. Molasses itself told another story. Imported from Caribbean plantations, it was the byproduct of enslaved labor, shipped north by the barrel. It sweetened puddings, cranberry jellies, breads, and sauces, masking bitterness with the sweetness tied to chains. Diaries hint soldiers improvised in camps. In 1780, near Morristown, men caught sheep's blood, mixed it with meal, boiled it in a battered pot. The black stuff filled them, though some grew sick. Luxury marked the divide. Officers dined on puddings rich with cream, sugar, and spice, served in porcelain dishes beneath chandeliers. Their tables perfumed with Madeira, nutmeg, and rosewater. For common soldiers, pudding meant treacle-thickened blood. Mystery remains. In Boston, a charred logbook was found in a cellar, its pages ash, one line legible. 1 pint of milk, 1 glass of rosewater, half a pumpkin, stewed until memory. Did the fire consume recipes for puddings like these? The rest is gone. Only fragments linger. Imagine standing by that hearth, kettle hissing, treacle bubbling. Would you taste blood and sweetness mingled, or step back, the smell too sharp to bear? Hunger was fought not only at hearths or campfires, but in the dark, in cellars where the air stayed cool and damp. Preservation was both ritual and necessity. Without ice houses, families relied on patience, skill, and luck to carry food through the seasons. Step into one of those cellars in 1776. The smell meets you first. Damp stone, apples stored in barrels, salted fish stacked in casks, pumpkins rolled against the walls. Shelves lined with glass jars sealed in red wax, their contents hidden in darkness. Beans in brine, preserves thick with molasses, meats submerged in fat, hardened like marble. Wealthier households turned preservation into spectacle. Copper pots simmered currant jams until kitchens perfumed sweet. Porcelain jars from Europe held candied ginger, lined beside gilt stoppers of rosewater. Washington's Mount Vernon kept barrels of salted herring and casks of Madeira stacked high, corks bound in twine. For ordinary families, preservation meant bread crusts hard as stone, meat smoked black, beans carried in bags that smelled faintly of mildew. Methods varied, but were never perfect. Salt packed fish and pork until they stiffened. Smokehouses blackened cuts until safe but tough. Vinegar stung eyes when jars of pickled cucumbers or eggs were opened. Fruits boiled with molasses became jams dark as tar, sweet and bitter at once. Mystery lingers in fragments. In Virginia, archaeologists uncovered a sealed cellar. Inside, a glass jar fogged from within still held paste black as ink. Tests revealed marrow, cinnamon, treacle. No recipe matches. Was it spread for bread? Stirred into porridge? An experiment lost to memory? Imagine yourself there. A lantern sputters. You break a wax seal, the sound like a sigh. Vinegar sharp, sugar burnt, marrow rich, rises into the air. Would you taste what another century preserved, or leave it sealed in silence? Luxury contrasted survival as always. A Boston merchant's table held porcelain bowls of candied nuts, silver spoons dipping into cherries soaked in brandy. A soldier nearby gnawed on firecakes with weevils baked in. Preservation meant sweetness for some, bitterness for others. And still, root cellars endured. Apples shriveled but edible. Pumpkins soft but stew-worthy. Wax pressed smooth by hands hoping food would last until spring. Many recipes began here, scribbled in logbooks, later burned. Tastes lost when jars shattered or seals failed. Would you have opened the jar, sealed in black paste, dared cinnamon and marrow's forgotten flavor, or stepped back, leaving its mystery intact? Hunger was constant in the revolution, yet sometimes war paused for spectacle, moments when scarcity gave way to ritual abundance. In Boston, 1793, Liberty Square filled with crowds. To honor the French Revolution, an ox was led forward with a placard, "Peace offering to liberty and equality." It was carved in public, the meat roasted and shared. 1,600 loaves of bread rose in carts. Barrels of punch stood open. The smell of citrus and rum drifting through narrow streets. Music and cheers drowned hunger for a night. Yet tension lingered. Some remembered the Coffee Riot of 1777, when women dragged merchant Thomas Boylston into the street for hoarding beans. Others recalled bread riots, whispers of merchants who grew fat while soldiers starved. Now bread and meat were piled high, and still the question pressed, who ate first and who went without? Feasts held both simplicity and luxury. Punch, mixed with sugar and citrus, was served with silver ladles into glass tumblers that glowed in torchlight. The ox roasted whole, fat dripping on embers, the smell rich and sweet. Bread was passed hand to hand, steam rising as crusts broke. For enlisted soldiers and the poor, the feast was relief. For officers, it was ritual. Tables draped in linen, porcelain plates gleaming beneath chandeliers. Madeira poured into crystal, fowl glazed with cloves and nutmeg. Fragments remain at the edges. A Boston merchant scribbled in a letter, "A great feast was held, but too much was wasted. Too much the rest burned." Did he mean food or liberty itself? Picture the square when fires cooled, bones left in pits, bread crusts scattered, punch scent lingering in gutters. Some bellies full, others still hungry. What was remembered? Liberty toasted in silver, or waste left in the mud? Would you have raised a glass, citrus and rum, sweet on your lips, believing liberty was made real in feasts? Or stood at the edge, uneasy as plenty, and hunger sat side by side? The revolution was fought with muskets and proclamations, but also with drink. Behind tavern doors, beneath chandeliers in Congress halls, in winter camps, alcohol carried soldiers through hunger, fueled protest, and marked defiance. In Boston, 1768, John Hancock ordered shipments of Madeira wine. Fortified and sweet, it survived storms at sea. Corks, sealed with wax, crates damp with seepage. Hancock undercounted his imports to evade duties. Wine became rebellion. The smell of spilled Madeira mingled with salt and tar on the docks as crowds stirred to anger. By 1774, Madeira was ritual. Congress delegates toasted independence in Philadelphia parlors, silver goblets catching candlelight, punch bowls steamed with nutmeg and citrus, their perfume sharp and sweet. Jefferson later recalled July 4th, 1776. Glasses of Madeira lifted in crystal, amber trembling as liberty was declared. At Valley Forge in 1777, soldiers gnawed on firecakes and boiled ox liver. Yet Washington ordered nearly 2,000 bottles of Madeira. Wooden crates stacked in headquarters, seals melting faintly near the fire. Officers drank by lamplight from porcelain and cut glass, their words softened by fortified sweetness, while men outside chewed bread blackened by ash. Rum was different. Rum belonged to everyone. Distilled in New England from Caribbean molasses, it flowed in taverns and camps alike. Barrels rolled down wharves, sticky boards under sailors' boots. In taverns, pewter mugs clattered on oak tables, the air heavy with smoke, sweat, and rum's sharp burn. Men drank an average of 4 gallons per year, astonishing even to themselves. In camps, rum dulled hunger, issued by the gill, Poured into tin cups, it burned down throats, numbed by salted pork and rancid bread. It masked rot, steadied hands, warmed bellies. But every sip was tied to chains. Molasses was born of enslaved labor in Caribbean fields. Sweetness carried silence. Luxury marked the divide. In New York, British officers feasted under chandeliers, glass decanters of port and Madeira glowing amber. Roasted pheasants and puddings perfumed with cloves crowded tables. Just a year later, Boston's women stormed warehouses for coffee, dragging merchants into the streets. Liberty was defended in crystal glasses and in clenched fists. Mystery endures in ledgers. One Philadelphia receipt from 1781 lists: wine, fine, for the general. The ink neat, the delivery never confirmed. How many bottles vanished into private tables while soldiers went hungry? Picture it: a punch bowl rimmed with porcelain, nutmeg floating on steaming rum, or a tin cup in a camp, the spirit sharp enough to burn away hunger for a moment. Which cup would you have lifted, the crystal of liberty or the tin of survival? The winter of 1777 dragged on at Valley Forge. Snow sealed the ground, tents sagged with frost, and smoke rose from fires that did little more than sting the eyes. Hunger cut deeper than cold. Rations, when they came, were meager. Salt pork riddled with bone, flour crawling with insects, beans hard from age. Firecakes baked on hot stones filled bellies, but tasted of ash. Soldiers wrote of gnawing hunger as bitter as any wound. Into that misery came a baker, Christopher Ludwig, German-born, hair already gone to white, carried not a musket but an oath. Congress had appointed him superintendent of bakers for the Continental Army. They offered him a contract that would let him profit. For every 100 pounds of flour, he might return 100 pounds of bread and pocket the rest as gain. It was standard practice, even expected. But Ludwig refused. "I am no mercenary," he told them. "For every 100 pounds of flour in my hands, I will return 135 pounds of bread." It was a declaration as patriotic as any signed in ink. His ovens glowed against the frozen dark. The smell of yeast and wood smoke drifted through camps where men had almost forgotten such scents. Dough, stretched with care, rose in the heat. Loaves emerged brown-crusted, their tops cracked, steam curling into cold air. Soldiers cupped them in hands raw from frost, tearing them apart before they cooled. Imagine the sound: a crust breaking, a sigh of relief, the low murmur of men eating something more than flour and water for the first time in weeks. In his ovens, there was no profit, no hoarding, only sustenance. Bread became more than food. It was faith, proof that not every hand sought gain in war. While officers lifted crystal goblets of Madeira in tents trimmed with linen, Ludwig's bread smoked in iron ovens, passed from soldier to soldier, eaten in silence beneath tattered canvas. The contrast was stark, yet both realities coexisted. One table gleamed with silver spoons and porcelain dishes, the other with crusts passed from hand to hand. One world toasted liberty with fortified sweetness, the other clung to loaves pulled from fire by a man who chose honesty over profit. Years later, Ludwig's oath would be remembered as clearly as any battle won. A baker's vow, made in the dark of Valley Forge, when bread meant life and trust meant everything. Would you have taken the profit, counting gain while men starved? Or given back more than was asked, letting your ovens glow for those who had nothing else? If this story held you, let me ask, what do you think? Should Ludwig's name be remembered with the generals, his bread equal to their bayonets? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you can keep turning the pages of history's ledger with me. Long before muskets cracked at Lexington, rebellion brewed in teapots. For generations, colonists drank British tea poured into porcelain cups, sweetened with sugar from Caribbean fields. Its aroma was ritual, refinement. But after Parliament's taxes and the 1773 Boston Tea Party, tea became treason. To sip it was to sip loyalty to the crown. Patriots turned to coffee. In taverns, pewter mugs clattered on oak tables, steam curling into rafters black with smoke. The air was thick with tobacco and ale, but it was coffee that marked defiance. Each bitter swallow said no to Britain's leaf. Scarcity soon sharpened defiance. Imports faltered, merchants hoarded. Abigail Adams recorded the Boston Coffee Riot of 1777, when more than 100 women marched on Thomas Boylston's warehouse. Skirts brushed cobblestones, carts rattled. They demanded beans. Boylston refused. Dragged into the street, his wig crooked, he surrendered his keys. Doors opened, burlap spilled. The sharp scent of raw beans filled the air. Hunger carried rebellion into the street. When beans failed, families turned to substitutes. Raspberry leaf, sage, chamomile, boiled in iron kettles, earthy but thin. By candlelight, cups lifted with pride, bitter herbs transformed into patriot ritual. But luxury clung elsewhere. In New York, loyalists kept their tea rituals intact. Porcelain cups, trimmed in gold. Silver spoons stirring leaves steeped in mahogany tables glow. Sugar bowls gleamed. Rosewater jellies sat beside steaming cups. Chandeliers blazed overhead as soldiers drilled in mud outside. The contrast was sharp. Patriots drank bitter herbs in taverns. Loyalists raised porcelain to their lips. Both claimed loyalty through taste. Fragments remain. A soldier in 1781 wrote, "We drink coffee when it can be had, else nothing at all." A Virginia housewife praised raspberry leaf tea as pleasant, if not the same. Their words browned with age, but the meaning endures. Ritual survives even when flavor changes. Would you have joined the women, fists on Boylston's collar, the smell of beans clinging to your dress? Or brewed raspberry leaves in silence, letting protest steep quietly in your cup? Not all memory of the revolution is bitter. In colonial kitchens, sweetness endured, even when hunger pressed. Families clung to rituals, pies, tarts, puddings perfumed with rosewater and nutmeg, flavors that reminded them life was more than survival. Molasses was everywhere, imported from the Caribbean in sticky barrels. It was the sweetener of choice when sugar was scarce. It flavored cranberry tarts baked in Massachusetts kitchens, berries stewed into jellies, poured into butter crusts that filled houses with warmth. Children licked spoons stained dark, the taste burnt sweet against salted soups and firecakes. Pumpkin was constant, yet never plain. Hannah Glass's cookbook called for pumpkin stewed with milk, eggs, sugar, and butter, but also nutmeg, Malaga wine, and rosewater. Imagine the perfume. Nutmeg grated fine, rosewater poured delicate, the crust golden, the filling amber in firelight. Outside, soldiers chewed cakes of ash. Inside, families sliced pies that carried perfumes across oceans. Spices themselves were luxury. Nutmeg, cinnamon, cloves, scraped sparingly from locked chests, a pinch at a time. Even whispers of them transformed kitchens. Luxury and scarcity coexisted. Washington's tables perfumed with Madeira and rosewater. Jefferson importing copper molds for ice cream. At Valley Forge, Ludwig's bread smoked from iron ovens. Soldiers chewing crusts without sweetness. Two realities lived side by side, and still, mystery lingers. A burned ledger found beneath a Boston boarding house left one recipe line intact. 1 pint of milk, 1 glass of rosewater, half a pumpkin, stewed until memory. The rest consumed by ash. Whose hand wrote it? A wife, a tavern keeper, a maid preserving a dish never copied again? The faint trace of rosewater clung even to the charred page. Would you have tasted that pie, savoring rosewater and nutmeg, while soldiers nearby boiled organs in grey broth? Or closed the book, unable to read sweetness in a season of hunger? On paper, a continental soldier's daily ration seemed generous. A pound of meat, a pound of flour, peas or beans, a little milk, rice or corn, sometimes molasses. Enough to keep men marching. Enough, if only paper matched reality. War is never neat. Supplies broke down, wagons mired in mud. Commissary agents bribed or overwhelmed. At Valley Forge in 1777, rations often meant nothing. Soldiers gnawed salted pork so hard it cracked teeth, baked flour and water into cakes dense as stone. Some days there was no flour, only hunger. Joseph Plum Martin remembered lining up for rations only to hear, "No bread today, boys." He boiled scraps instead, an ox's liver, a sheep's head, a spleen. The smell alone could sicken, yet he ate because he had to. Picture the camp, smoke thin above weak fires, men hunched in ragged coats, boots torn open, pots rattled with grey water, and scraps too small to name. Spoons scraped iron. Men chewed in silence. Now picture the ration book. Neat columns promising abundance. A pound of meat, a pound of flour. But beside milk and rice, the word none repeated. Ink orderly, life chaotic. Better than nothing, one soldier muttered, chewing pork so salty it split his lips. No, another answered, it is nothing. In taverns far from the front, citizens debated army supply over roast meats, Madeira glowing in crystal, punch ladled into porcelain cups. They spoke of sacrifice. The men in the ranks lived it, gnawing hunger, not rhetoric. Yet generosity flickered. Christopher Ludwig's ovens gave real bread, loaves steaming, crusts cracking. For moments, hunger eased. Men chewed slowly, as if trying to remember what bread once meant. The hunger lasted longer than battles. Martin wrote of it years later, still tasting ash from firecakes, still smelling sour fat. Many veterans left fewer words, but their silence says enough. Would you have stood in that line, waiting for bread that never came? Would you have chewed insects baked into firecakes because nothing else stood between you and collapse? The revolution swung between extremes. In the same year, soldiers gnawed firecakes in snow at Valley Forge. Others dined beneath chandeliers, glasses raised in toasts, tables heavy with roasts and puddings. Hunger and luxury lived side by side. In Boston, 1793, Liberty Square filled with crowds. An ox was led forward with a placard, peace offering to liberty and equality. It was carved in public, roasted whole, its fat dripping onto embers. 1,600 loaves of bread stacked high, punch flowing from barrels, the smell of citrus and rum carrying across the square. For one night, hunger gave way to abundance. But memory lingered. Abigail Adams had written of women storming a warehouse for coffee in 1777. Others recalled bread riots and whispers of merchants growing fat while soldiers starved. To roast an ox in Liberty Square was triumph for some, reminder for others. Feast and famine were not opposites, they were neighbors. Washington himself held banquets even in war. In 1777, he ordered crates of Madeira, bottles sealed with wax, their fortified sweetness filling headquarters. Officers dined on porcelain plates with silver forks, Madeira glowing in crystal. Outside, men gnawed salted pork, so sharp it burned the mouth, or bread blackened with soot. 2 tables, 1 flag, 2 realities. Imagine the contrast. At one table, chandeliers blazing, nutmeg shaved into steaming punch, roast fowl perfumed with cloves. At another, grey broth stirred in iron pots, smoke stinging eyes, firecakes scraped from stones. Liberty toasted in wine on one side, endurance chewed in silence on the other. Fragments remain. A Valley Forge ration list from 1778 shows flour and pork, but beside milk and rice, only the word none. A Philadelphia diary in 1779 describes a dinner of turkey, puddings, and Madeira until late in the night. 2 documents, same war, 2 worlds. When the ox roast ended in Boston, bones littered cobblestones, crusts scattered, punch scent fading into gutters. Some walked home full, others still hungry. What was remembered? Liberty toasted in silver, or waste in the street? Would you have stood in the square, tearing bread warm in your hands? Or thought of soldiers miles away, chewing firecakes in silence, toasting nothing at all? Not every taste of the revolution survived. Some vanished before they could be written twice. Others linger only in fragments, half-burned pages, sealed jars, a spoon worn smooth. History is not only battles and treaties, it is flavors, and many are gone. In 1852, workmen tearing down a Boston boarding house found a charred logbook, its spine blackened, most pages ash. 1 recipe line remained, 1 pint of milk, 1 glass of rosewater, half a pumpkin, stewed until memory. No author, no year, yet those who handled it swore they smelled rosewater, faint and impossible. Was it a variation of Hannah Glass's pumpkin pie, with milk, eggs, Malaga wine, nutmeg, or something humbler, scribbled by a housemaid never meant for history? The rest is silence. In Virginia, masons repairing a cellar uncovered a glass jar, fogged within, its wax lid unbroken. Inside, a black paste, dense and sweet. Tests revealed treacle, cinnamon, marrow. No recipe calls for it. Was it spread for bread, stirred into porridge, or simply a failed experiment, sealed and forgotten until time preserved it as mystery? Then, a spoon, found in soil near a farmstead, its bowl blackened, its initials nearly erased. Who had it fed? A soldier stirring firecakes, a child scooping molasses before bed, or an officer lifting it beside porcelain plates rimmed with gold? The initials remain, the name is gone. These fragments raise more questions than answers. They are not in cookbooks or ration logs. They live only between ash and silence. Luxury left clearer marks. Washington's orders for Madeira by the cask. Jefferson's notes on Rosewater ice cream. Adams' family letters describing cranberry tarts thickened with molasses. But for every flavor preserved in ink, dozens disappeared. Recipes scribbled once, sealed once, never repeated. Imagine holding that charred page, rosewater drifting faintly from scorched paper, breaking a wax seal on a jar black with treacle, brushing dirt from a spoon whose initials fade under your thumb. Would you taste what remains, or preserve its mystery by leaving it untouched? Every war keeps its own ledger, not only in paybooks or ration lists, but in stomachs. Hunger writes itself more sharply than most battles. The revolution was no different. Its record of scarcity lives in firecakes, in salted meat, gnawed past recognition, in beans boiled until the water turned grey. On parchment, rations looked orderly. In 1775, Congress decreed each soldier receive a pound of meat, a pound of flour, peas or beans, milk if available, rice, corn, and molasses. Enough, at least on paper. But in snowbound camps or muddy campaigns, men received half or none. Columns that promised abundance turned into columns marked none. Joseph Plum Martin described it without flourish. Bread so hard it cracked teeth, meat so rancid he spat it into the fire, flour mixed with water into cakes dense and flavorless. Firecakes he called them, sometimes crawling with insects, sometimes baked to ash. Better than nothing, a soldier muttered. Martin replied, no, it was nothing. Picture Valley Forge in 1777. Smoke thin above weak fires, tents sagging under snow, pots rattled with scraps, an ox's spleen, a sheep's head, bones boiled until broth turned cloudy. The smell sour, metallic, heavy. Men chewed because they had no choice, retching into snow and eating again. Hunger was not universal. Officers dined on salted hams simmering in copper pots, their meals served on porcelain beneath candlelight. Washington's tent glowed with Madeira, the fortified sweetness perfuming the air. Toasts in crystal rang, while soldiers licked crumbs from their hands. Two armies under one flag, but their tables worlds apart. Fragments of this ledger survive. A ration list from 1778, ink browned, edges torn, shows pork and flour still issued, but milk, beans, and raw rice crossed out with none. A Philadelphia merchant's diary that same year records dinners of turkey, puddings, and Madeira until late in the night. Two truths, one in scarcity, one in plenty. The ledger of hunger is not only about food denied, it is also about food remembered. Scrapple fried in lard, pumpkin pies perfumed with rosewater, cranberry tarts glazed with molasses. Soldiers dreamed of these while chewing firecakes. Memory fed them when rations could not. But some foods vanished altogether. A sealed jar in Virginia, filled with marrow, treacle, and cinnamon. No recipe survives. A charred logbook in Boston, the line, half a pumpkin, stewed until memory. The only words spared by flame. These are the missing entries, tastes too fragile to last. Would you have swallowed the fire cake, ash on your tongue, only to see another dawn? Or closed your eyes, clinging to the imagined sweetness of rosewater and nutmeg, while food itself slipped away? Hunger gnawed not only at the body, but at trust. When rations failed, whispers rose like smoke above campfires, thin, persistent, impossible to ignore. By the winter of 1777, Valley Forge was not only a camp of endurance, but of rumor. Soldiers muttered that commissary officers pocketed supplies, selling flour and pork in nearby towns. Others whispered of wagons turned away, barrels of beef left to spoil, while men ate ash-baked firecakes. Someone profits while we starve, one voice said by the fire. The name is lost, but the suspicion endured. There were thefts, too. A Chester County farmer wrote in February 1778 that his smokehouse had been raided by men in ragged coats. Hams, chickens, even a barrel of cider disappeared. He did not name them soldiers, but hunger made neighbors into enemies. Picture the camp. A soldier stirred thin stew, the smell of bone broth faint in the cold. He looked toward the officer's tent, glowing faintly with candlelight, a bottle lifted to a glass. Did he believe his officer suffered with him, or suspect betrayal? Trust cracked as easily as hard bread. Barter filled the gaps. Men traded buttons for bread, tobacco for cider, rations for boots, when frostbitten toes demanded leather more than food. In Morristown in 1780, soldiers swapped coffee beans for scraps of meat, their breath fogging as ink froze in wells. Hunger turned everything into currency. Luxury sharpened the divide. Officers toasted with Madeira, its sweetness perfuming headquarters. Silver forks lifted venison. Porcelain plates carried puddings spiced with nutmeg. Outside, soldiers scraped kettles bare. One wrote, "We live upon what we can steal, beg, or barter." His hand shook enough to blot the page. The smoke of suspicion never cleared. In Congress, accusations of corruption flared, names defended or denied. But for men in line waiting for bread that never came, the politics mattered little. Their ledger was simpler. Today, hunger. Tomorrow, perhaps a loaf. Mystery remains. Among Washington's papers lies a receipt for barrels of flour that never reached the army. The ink steady, the sum exact, but no delivery marked. Did those barrels spoil, sell at profit, or remain sealed in cellars, contents wasted into silence? Picture Valley Forge again. Smoke low over thin fires, men silent, rumors drifting like sparks. Would you have believed them, or clung to trust, even as your stomach ached? Two tables, one draped in linen, heavy with porcelain, the other a rough plank, scarred by knives and scorched by kettles. Both stood during the Revolution, both fed men under the same flag, and both told entirely different stories. In Philadelphia, 1779, members of Congress sat in a hall lit by chandeliers. Wax candles dripped onto silver holders, their flames mirrored in cut glass decanters filled with Madeira wine. Servants moved silently, pouring punch laced with nutmeg and citrus, ladling it into porcelain cups rimmed with gold. The table itself groaned with abundance. Roast turkey, puddings baked with molasses, bread so soft it tore easily between fingers. The air smelled of spice and butter, smoke from hearth fires carrying through polished wood. Conversation flowed as steadily as the wine. Liberty was toasted with sweetness on the tongue. Now shift only miles away, to the lines outside Valley Forge in the winter of 1777. Here the table was not linen, but splintered wood dragged near a fire. The plates were tin, the spoons dulled pewter or wood. The meal was a firecake, flour and water slapped onto a hot stone, baked until hard as brick. The smell was not spice but scorched ash. Men chewed slowly, forcing it down, their breath rising in clouds of frost. A scrap of salted pork might appear once a week, its surface white with crystals, the taste so sharp it burned the tongue. Madeira was spoken of like rumor. Instead, men passed a tin cup of rum when luck allowed, the liquid biting like fire, the smell of molasses smoke clinging long after. One soldier muttered, "This is not food, it is punishment." Another answered, "Better than nothing." Their voices carried in the crackle of fire, in the shuffle of boots stamping against snow. At the officer's tent nearby, shadows leaned across canvas as goblets lifted in lamplight. 2 tables, same night, same army. Washington straddled both worlds. He dined with officers on porcelain, his table supplied with Madeira and hams salted long before winter. Yet he also walked the camps, saw men gnawing on ash-flavored bread, their boots split, their eyes hollow. He wrote in January 1778 of soldiers without meat for days. Still, the banquets continued when diplomacy demanded. In those halls, chandeliers glowed, Madeira flowed. Appearances mattered as much as survival. Luxury spoke loudly in wartime. Jefferson, years later, recalled ice cream in Paris, a dessert perfumed with rosewater and served in molds, something unimaginable in camp. John Hancock's Madeira shipments in the 1760s had already sparked riots in Boston, proof that luxury could ignite rebellion as easily as comfort. Officers carried luxury with them into war, silver spoons tucked into trunks, porcelain cups cushioned in linen, Madeira bottles sealed with wax. They sat beside crates of musket balls, strange companions in the dark. Contrast was everywhere. In 1781, in Philadelphia, a dinner for French allies featured ox roast, puddings, and punch bowls carved from silver. At that very time, soldiers in New Jersey were foraging for turnips, scraping bark from trees, boiling shoe leather softened in kettles. Diaries record the taste of desperation, bitter, foul, but swallowed anyway. Mystery lingers in fragments. A ledger from 1779 lists barrels of flour delivered to Philadelphia, but none reached the army at Morristown. Were they sold, stolen, spoiled? A diary from a merchant's wife describes a dinner of roasted fowl with Madeira, but never mentions the soldiers camped just outside the city gates. 2 documents, side by side. 2 tables that never touched. Imagine being seated at one of them, the chandelier's glow reflected in silver spoons, Madeira warm in crystal, spice perfuming the air. Or across from it, a firecake hard as stone, snow melting into tin cups, smoke stinging your eyes as you chew ash. Which would you choose if choice was possible? And if you knew both tables fed the same cause, would you taste liberty in the sweetness of Madeira or in the silence of firecakes? Food was never only food in the revolution. It was politics, protest, and defiance. A cup of tea, a spoon of molasses, even a loaf of bread could declare allegiance as loudly as a musket fired across a field. December 16th, 1773, Boston Harbor. 342 chests of tea split open, leaves spilling into dark water. The smell of tannin rose sharp in the cold night air, mixing with salt and pitch from the wharves. Men in disguise hurled chest after chest, boards cracking, tea staining the tide. One bystander later said, "The water looked like a dark stew." That night, tea became treason. From then on, to sip it was to sip loyalty to the crown. Patriots turned instead to coffee, but coffee was scarce, and scarcity fueled anger. July 1777, Boston again. Abigail Adams wrote of women marching through the streets, skirts brushing cobblestones, fists clenched. They stormed Thomas Boylston's warehouse, convinced he hoarded beans while soldiers starved. The doors were forced open, the smell of burlap and raw beans spilling into the street. Boylston himself was dragged into daylight, his collar torn, his wig crooked. A woman's voice rang out, "No man shall keep back what the people need." The crowd roared approval. Coffee was seized, carried away in baskets, its sharp scent clinging to clothes long after. But protest wasn't always loud. In Virginia kitchens, women brewed substitutes: raspberry leaf, sage, chamomile. Steam curled from iron kettles, the taste earthy, faint. Nothing like imported tea. Yet every sip was a declaration: better bitter herbs than taxed leaf. These quiet cups carried rebellion as surely as Boston's harbor. Even sweeteners became political. Sugar imported from the West Indies, tied to slavery and British control, was expensive and fraught. Molasses, cheaper and darker, became the patriot's choice. It flavored cranberry tarts, puddings, blood sausage, even beer. Its smell, burnt, heavy, rich, was the scent of thrift and defiance. Families stirred it into porridge by candlelight, the thick syrup dripping from spoons carved smooth by generations. Luxury remained, but even luxury carried protest. John Hancock's Madeira shipments, taxed and disputed, helped ignite Boston mobs. Washington ordered Madeira by the cask throughout the war, pouring it into cut crystal glasses, raising toasts that blended politics with ritual. Each sip was sweet, fortified, perfumed with spice. But every bottle had risked seizure. Every cork marked resistance to duties. Food riots echoed across the colonies. In 1779, women in Pennsylvania raided markets, demanding fair prices for bread. They carried loaves above their heads like banners, shouting in streets that smelled of yeast and ash. Farmers resisted requisition officers, hiding hogs in forests. burying barrels of cider in fields. They whispered to neighbors, "The army takes all, leaves nothing." And still, moments of mystery endure. A merchant's account book from 1775 lists tea, destroyed, coffee, taken, molasses, bartered, wine, lost. The handwriting trembles, ink blotted as if written in haste. No details remain. Was it riot, theft, or simple spoilage? The ledger is silent, but its fragments hint at the taste of defiance. Imagine the street, the air filled with the smell of roasted coffee spilling from burlap sacks, voices shouting, boots striking stone. Or the harbor, waves choked with leaves, the salt wind carrying the perfume of wasted tea. Would you have thrown the chest into the water? Would you have seized beans from a merchant's storehouse? Or sat in silence, sipping bitter herbs by candlelight, letting protest steep quietly in your cup? The revolution is often remembered in muskets and declarations, in parchments signed and battles fought. Yet beneath the speeches and monuments lies another record, quieter but no less enduring. A ledger written not in ink, but in flavor, in hunger, in ash. Some tastes survived. Pumpkin pies perfumed with rosewater and Malaga wine, still baked on autumn tables. Cranberry tarts, thickened with molasses, their sharpness sweetened into tradition. Scrapple, fried in lard until the edges crackled, carried forward by thrift. Coffee, once bitter symbol of defiance, became a national obsession. And Madeira, Washington's favorite, remained the drink of celebration. Poured into cut crystal goblets, amber light glowing in candlelit halls. These were the flavors of survival turned into memory, carried from the 18th century into ours. Others vanished. Firecakes baked on stones, hard as ash. Blood puddings boiled for hours in hearthside kettles, their taste of iron and treacle too bound to desperation to last. Organs stewed until men retched in the snow. Jars sealed with black paste, never opened, their recipes forgotten. Pages of cookbooks burned, fragments half legible, half a pumpkin. Stewed until memory. A spoon unearthed from soil, initials faded beyond recognition. These tastes disappeared with the hunger that made them necessary. And so the revolution's ledger is incomplete. One column filled with flavors we still know, another marked only with silence. Both remind us that liberty was not only fought with muskets and treaties, but with bread torn in darkness, wine raised in toasts, pies scented with rosewater, and firecakes swallowed in silence. Imagine yourself at one of those tables, a soldier at Valley Forge, chewing a cake of ash and flour by weak firelight, or an officer lifting a crystal glass of Madeira beneath chandeliers, nutmeg shaved into punch, the air perfumed with spice. Both tables belong to the same cause. Which would you remember? Which would define liberty more in your mouth? The bitterness of survival or the sweetness of ritual? This is what history leaves us. Fragments, A burned recipe, a sealed jar, a spoon smoothed by time. Flavors carried forward, flavors lost forever. A ledger of hunger, written in ashes and memory. Tell me, should history remember the pumpkin pies and Madeira toasts, or the firecakes and blood puddings? Which speaks louder of the revolution? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story carried you tonight, like this video, subscribe to History's Ledger and ring the bell, so the next page is waiting when you are ready to open it. And when this book closes, another begins. Next time, we move beyond kitchens and camps to the fragile years that followed victory. America had won its independence, but nearly lost itself in the aftermath. Join me for the next video. Why America almost collapsed after winning the revolution. Would you have celebrated freedom or feared the cracks already spreading beneath it?